But at a quiet corner table, two little girls in matching wheelchairs sat before a beautiful but lonely cake. Twin daughters of the powerful CEO Alexander Reed, completely untouched by the laughter surrounding them. Their bright eyes slowly dimmed as the candles flickered lower, melting into puddles of wax. Then a quiet voice broke through the silence. James Miller, a single dad with his own daughter, stepped closer, smiling gently. "Mind if we join you?" That simple moment changed everything. Stay with us. This touching story will absolutely warm your heart. James Miller, 40, had been raising his 11-year-old daughter Emma alone for 3 years, ever since losing his wife to cancer. Tonight was supposed to be a small celebration. Emma's friend had canceled her sleepover, leaving them with dinner reservations at Romano's family restaurant that James couldn't afford to waste. The modest family restaurant buzzed with weekend energy as they found their table near the large windows overlooking the parking lot. James worked double shifts at Patterson's Auto Repair, his hands permanently stained with engine oil despite his best efforts. But he'd saved enough to give Emma a proper birthday dinner at her favorite place. Emma, bright-eyed and observant in the way that children who've experienced loss often become, noticed them first. Two girls who appeared to be exactly her age, sitting perfectly still at a corner table decorated with expensive balloons and an elaborate 3-tiered cake that remained completely untouched. "Dad, look," Emma whispered, tugging gently at James's sleeve. "Why are they sitting all alone? It's somebody's birthday, but they look so sad." Naquim, James followed her gaze to the corner table, where two beautiful girls in matching purple dresses sat in state-of-the-art wheelchairs, their dark hair styled in identical braids, their faces carrying an expression of resigned loneliness that no child should ever wear. The cake before them was clearly expensive. Fondant decorations, professional frosting work, candles that spelled out "Happy 8th Birthday," but it might as well have been invisible for all the joy it was bringing. Standing nearby, constantly checking his phone and engaged in what appeared to be urgent business conversations, was a man James recognized from local newspaper photos. Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Industries, one of the region's most successful technology companies. His tailored suit and confident posture spoke of wealth and power, but his distracted attention to his daughters revealed something else entirely. "Their daddy looks busy," Emma observed with the brutal honesty that children possess. "Do you think they're waiting for someone to help them with their cake?" James hesitated, understanding instinctively that approaching a man of Alexander Reed's stature might be perceived as intrusion or presumption. Different social classes didn't typically mix at family restaurants, and a mechanic in his best jeans and button-down shirt might not be welcome at a table that probably cost more than James earned in a week. But Emma's compassionate nature had been shaped by their own experiences of loss and loneliness, and James had learned that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. He stood up slowly, took Emma's hand, and walked across the restaurant toward the corner table, where two little girls were learning that wealth couldn't buy the thing they needed most: someone who cared enough to celebrate with them. Kneeling down to bring himself to the twins' eye level, James smiled with the genuine warmth that had made him popular with his customers and beloved by his daughter. His voice was soft, respectful, but carried the confidence of someone who understood that kindness was never inappropriate. "Hi there," he said gently, including both girls in his gaze. "My daughter Emma and I were wondering, would you mind if we joined your birthday party? It looks like you have an amazing cake there, and birthdays are always better when there are more people to share them." For the first time that evening, genuine light returned to the twins' eyes. The transformation was immediate and magical. Within minutes, the corner table that had been a pocket of sadness became the most joyful spot in the entire restaurant. Emma, with the natural ease of a child who had learned empathy through her own struggles, introduced herself to the twins, Sophie and Grace Reed, and immediately began asking about their favorite colors, their pets, and whether they liked the same cartoons she watched. James took charge of the birthday celebration with the practical efficiency of a single parent who had learned to make every moment count. He carefully lit the candles that had gone out, helped the girls make wishes, and led an enthusiastic rendition of "Happy Birthday" that drew smiles from nearby tables. "What did you wish for?" Emma asked as the twins blew out their candles together, their faces glowing with the first genuine happiness they'd shown all evening. "We wished for a friend like you," Sophie whispered, her voice carrying the shy hope of a child who had learned not to expect too much from social interactions. James cut the elaborate cake into generous portions, telling silly jokes about the frosting decorations and making exaggerated expressions of amazement at the professional quality of the dessert. The twins giggled, actual, uninhibited laughter that seemed to surprise them as much as it delighted Emma. Alexander Reed observed this interaction from several feet away, his business phone still pressed to his ear, but his attention completely focused on his daughter's transformation. In 3 years since the accident that had left them paralyzed, he had never seen them respond to strangers with such immediate trust and joy. When his conference call finally ended, Alexander approached the table with the careful uncertainty of someone who had spent years being successful in boardrooms but felt completely out of place in situations involving genuine human connection. "I want to thank you," he said to James, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "I don't think I've seen my daughter smile like this since, well, in a very long time." James looked up from the cake he was serving, his expression carrying no judgment despite the obvious evidence that these children had been celebrating their birthday alone. "Kids shouldn't have to celebrate by themselves," he said simply. "Birthdays are meant to be shared." Over the following weeks, their paths began crossing with increasing frequency. At Central Park, where Emma pushed the twins on specially adapted swings. At the Children's Therapy Center, where Sophie and Grace attended physical therapy sessions. At Washington Elementary, where all 3 girls were enrolled in the same grade level. What started as coincidental encounters gradually evolved into intentional meetings as both families discovered they were filling voids in each other's lives that neither had fully recognized before. During one particularly honest conversation on a park bench while watching their daughters play together, Alexander finally voiced the fear that had been haunting him since becoming a single father. "I don't know how to be a dad, James. I know how to run board meetings, negotiate contracts, manage quarterly projections, but I have no idea how to help my daughters be happy." James shared his own struggles with equal honesty, working 60-hour weeks to keep their small apartment, fighting to give Emma a normal childhood despite their limited resources, lying awake at night worrying that his best efforts would never be enough to replace what she had lost when her mother died. "The difference is, you're trying," James told his new friend. "You show up. You care. Everything else can be learned." The bond that formed between their families extended far beyond the friendship between the fathers. Emma had appointed herself as the twins' unofficial big sister, teaching them games that could be played from wheelchairs, reading them stories during their therapy appointments, and including them in every social activity with the fierce protectiveness of someone who understood what it meant to feel different from other children. Sophie and Grace, who had been withdrawn and isolated since their accident, began calling Emma their best friend and asking when they could see her again before they had even finished their current visit. For the first time since his wife's death, James found himself looking forward to social interactions, rather than simply enduring them out of necessity for Emma's sake. Keep watching, because when Alexander's painful past comes knocking, this fragile new family will be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday evening without warning, delivered by a process server who knocked on Alexander's door just as he was helping the twins with their homework at the kitchen table. The legal documents were formal, intimidating, and devastating. A custody petition filed by Victoria Reed, the woman who had walked out on her daughters 6 months after the car accident that had changed their lives forever. Victoria had disappeared from their lives when the medical bills mounted and the prognosis became clear. Sophie and Grace would never walk again. She had simply packed her belongings one morning while Alexander was at the hospital with the girls, leaving only a note saying she couldn't handle this life and needed to find herself. Now, 3 years later, she had returned with an expensive legal team and a carefully constructed case arguing that Alexander's demanding work schedule and emotional unavailability made him an unfit parent. The petition cited his long hours, frequent business travel, and what her lawyers termed inappropriate delegation of parental responsibilities to strangers, a reference to his growing reliance on James and Emma for emotional support. "She can't just come back and take them," James said when Alexander called him that night, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "She abandoned them when they needed her most." But Victoria's legal strategy was sophisticated and ruthless. She had spent the past year in therapy, documenting her recovery journey, and building a case that she was now emotionally prepared to provide the stability that Alexander allegedly couldn't offer. Her lawyers had hired private investigators who documented every moment the twins spent with James and Emma, framing their close relationship as evidence that Alexander was failing as a single parent. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Alexander hired the best family law attorney money could buy, but his lawyer was bluntly honest about their challenges. Courts generally favored biological mothers, especially when they could demonstrate rehabilitation and financial stability. The judge will want to see that you can provide emotional support, not just financial resources, his attorney explained. Your ex-wife's team will argue that you're emotionally distant, that you've essentially outsourced parenting to this mechanic and his daughter. When James volunteered to testify on Alexander's behalf, Victoria's legal team immediately began investigating his background, looking for any evidence that might undermine his credibility. They discovered his financial struggles, his lack of formal education beyond high school, his wife's medical debts that were still being paid off through garnished wages. The court hearing took place on a gray morning in November, with both sides presenting their cases to a family court judge who had seen every variation of custody dispute imaginable. Victoria appeared in court wearing conservative business attire, flanked by character witnesses who testified about her transformation and renewed commitment to motherhood. When Victoria's lead attorney questioned James on the witness stand, the class warfare became explicit and personal. Mr. Miller, you're a mechanic who works 60 hours a week, correct? You have no formal training in child development, no college education, no professional qualifications that would make you an expert on parenting children with disabilities? No, sir, James replied quietly, his calloused hands folded in his lap. I'm just someone who shows up when children need help. And you think that makes you qualified to influence major decisions about the care of these girls? You think your presence somehow compensates for their father's inability to connect with his own daughters? But before James could answer, something unexpected happened. Sophie and Grace, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery with a court-appointed advocate, stood up from their wheelchairs with the help of their mobility aids. He's not just a mechanic, Sophie said, her 8-year-old voice carrying clearly through the formal courtroom. He's the person who makes us laugh. He's the one who remembers we like extra frosting. He's the one who never treats us like we're broken, Grace added with the devastating honesty that only children possess. Mommy left when we got hurt. Daddy tries, but he doesn't know how to play. Mr. James knows how to make everything okay. The courtroom fell silent as the two girls continued speaking, telling the judge about birthday parties that weren't lonely anymore, about having a friend like Emma who didn't stare at their wheelchairs, about finally feeling like part of a real family instead of a responsibility that adults had to manage. Alexander stood up slowly, understanding that this moment would define the rest of their lives. When he spoke, his voice carried the conviction of someone who had finally learned the difference between providing for children and actually loving them. Your Honor, family isn't about money or status or who can provide the most expensive therapy. It's about who stays when things get difficult. It's about who shows up when children need someone to care. The judge's decision came 3 weeks later, delivered in a formal letter that Alexander read with trembling hands while James and the children waited anxiously in his living room. Full custody would remain with Alexander, but more importantly, the court had recognized the unconventional family structure that had formed around the twins' needs as beneficial rather than detrimental to their well-being. Victoria's petition was denied based on what the judge termed abandonment during a critical period, and her inability to demonstrate genuine understanding of her daughter's current emotional needs. The court noted that the twins had thrived under their father's care, particularly after forming connections with James and Emma that provided stability and joy that had been missing from their lives. In the months that followed, life settled into rhythms that none of them had imagined possible before that chance meeting in the restaurant. Alexander made fundamental changes to his work schedule, turning down travel opportunities and delegating responsibilities that kept him away from home during evenings and weekends. The corporate world that had once consumed his entire identity became just one part of a life that now revolved around school plays, therapy appointments, and the kind of ordinary family chaos that he had never appreciated before becoming a single parent. James's small garage began receiving referrals from Alexander's business connections, high-end clients who appreciated quality work, and were willing to pay premium prices for reliable service. But Alexander's support went beyond simple networking. He invested in new equipment and facility improvements, not as charity, but as partnership between friends who had learned to trust each other completely. "Let me invest in your business," Alexander had insisted. "Not because you need my help, but because I want to be part of building something that matters." Hanan, the children adapted to their new extended family structure with the resilience that young people possess when adults provide consistent love and security. Sophie and Grace joined Emma in transforming James's small backyard into an elaborate garden project, planting flowers in raised beds that could be tended from wheelchairs and creating art installations from recycled car parts that James brought home from the shop. Emma appointed herself as the twins' advocate at school, fiercely defending them against thoughtless comments from classmates and organizing inclusive activities that ensured everyone could participate regardless of physical limitations. Her natural leadership skills, developed through her own experiences with loss and adaptation, made her incredibly effective at building bridges between different groups of children. Alexander learned to appreciate simple pleasures that his corporate success had never provided: the satisfaction of helping with homework problems, the joy of reading bedtime stories, the privilege of being trusted with his daughter's fears and dreams and hopes for their futures. One Sunday afternoon in early spring, as they worked together in the garden, while the twins directed planting operations from their wheelchairs, Emma asked the question that had been forming in all their minds. "So, are we like one big family now?" James and Alexander exchanged a glance that carried the weight of everything they had been through together. The initial awkwardness of crossing social boundaries, the crisis that had tested their loyalty to each other, the gradual recognition that love comes in many forms and doesn't require biological connections to be real and lasting. "Yes, sweetheart," James said, wiping dirt from his hands on his jeans. "That's exactly what we are." Alexander nodded, his voice thick with emotion, as he watched his daughters laughing with their chosen sister. "We're a family that found each other when we all needed it most." That evening, they celebrated another birthday, not an official one, but what Emma declared to be the birthday of our family, marking the anniversary of that first meeting in Romano's restaurant. This time, the cake was homemade, slightly lopsided, and decorated with handprints from all four children. When the twins blew out the candles together, surrounded by the laughter and love they had wished for that lonely night 8 months earlier, their joy was complete and uncomplicated. They had learned that families could be created through choice rather than chance, that love multiplied when it was shared freely, and that sometimes the most important gifts came disguised as ordinary moments. As James tucked Emma into bed that night, she whispered sleepily, "Dad, I'm glad we helped them with their birthday. It made us a family." "Yes, it did, sweetheart," he replied, understanding finally that the best decisions he had ever made were the ones where he had chosen kindness over caution, connection over comfort, love over the safer distance that social conventions typically required. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Our Heart Stories for more powerful tales of love, healing, and the beautiful ways families find each other when they need it most.